Good morning, 11 o'clock service. Like he said, my name is Bryant, and I believe that the Lord is in this room right now. I believe that he has something really important to say to us. I believe that we can leave this place changed for the better. Do you agree with that, 11 o'clock service? Am I the only person who believes that? Are you with me? Have you ever gotten a text message that you wish you could ignore? Have you ever read a text message, turned off your phone and then just been like, nah, I'm gonna pretend like I didn't see that? Anybody ever? Am I the only person? Okay, there's some, cool. I remember when I was 14 years old, I got one of those text messages, and it was from my youth pastor at the time, a guy by the name of Matthew. And the text message simply read, "Hey Bryant, having some people over my house tomorrow for a small group Bible study. Do you want to come?" No. No, I did not want to go. That did not even remotely sound good to me. I had just recently started going to this church a couple of months previous. In fact, I had just recently started going to church, period, a couple of months previous. My family isn't saved, wasn't saved then, and a friend of mine just invited me to a church when I was 13, and I just started going. And honestly, the idea of a small group Bible study sounded terrible. It sounded boring, it sounded dull. I didn't know what it was like to study the Bible. I didn't even study for math tests. Do you know what I mean? That sounded somehow lamer than math. I was not about it. To be completely frank, I had better things to do with a Monday afternoon. But I was looking at the text message, and I was like, and so this was before the time of iPhones. I had a Motorola Razr. If you don't know what that is, it was like the Mercedes-Benz of the flip phone world. If you were walking through school and somebody had a Razr, you knew they were cool, or their parents loved them. So I held open this Motorola Razr, I read the text message, I closed it as fast as I could, I put the cell phone under my pillow, and I just walked away. If I wasn't physically near the cell phone, I wouldn't have to deal with it, right? I just walked away, and I was like, you know what? Maybe he'll forget he sent the text, that way I don't have to make up an excuse. This whole thing will go away. It didn't. I remember I went to church that Wednesday night for youth group, and I was hanging out in the youth room, and Pastor Matthew walked up to me, and he went, "Hey man, did you get my text?" My eyes got real big, oh no. And here's the thing, when somebody asks you a question like that, it's really less a question and more like a, hey, I know you got my text, and I know you got my text, so how awkward do you want to make this? And so you ever have a conversation with somebody where time seems to slow down and you can think through what you're going to say? So time seemed to have slowed down, and I'm like, oh man, how I respond to this question is going to determine what I do with the next year's worth of Monday afternoons. I need to be very careful with this. And so I just looked at him and I went, "No, man, I think my phone is busted," which is a lie, all right? Parents, if your teenagers ever tell you their phone's not working, they're lying, all right? They just didn't want to respond to you, all right? Their phone works just fine when they're on Instagram. "No, man, I think my phone is broken. I didn't get that text message." And I thought for sure that was going to be it. I was trying to get out of that conversation. And he was like, "Cool, well, hey, next Monday we're having Bible study at my house. Do you want to come?" You can't put a human being under your pillow and walk away. You can put your phone under your pillow. You can't put a human being under your pillow. And so I made up some lame excuse. I was like, "Nah, man, I can't. I got to wash my hair," or something. I don't remember what I said. I said something, and he was like, "Cool, maybe next time." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, maybe next time." We're being polite. That's what people say when you decline to something. A week later at youth ministry the next Wednesday, he comes up to me and he asks me again, "Hey, man, what are you doing this Monday? You want to come to small group Bible study?" "Nah, man, I have to clean my shoes." I said some dumb excuse. I have to stay after school. I never stayed after school. Just made up some lame excuse. And for the next month and a half, this continued. Every single Wednesday night, he would ask me, and if he didn't ask me on Wednesday, he'd send me a text. This wasn't going away. Do you ever encounter somebody who just isn't going to get the hint, isn't catching on? No matter how polite you're trying to be, is not going to let you off the hook. This isn't going away. So I kept making up excuse after excuse after excuse. And I'll never forget, it was a Monday afternoon. I was hanging out at my house after school, not doing my homework. I probably should have been doing my homework. And I got a text message from one of my friends that just said, "Hey, man, do you want to get pizza?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to get pizza." Of course, what kind of dumb question is that? Absolutely. He's like, "Cool, I'll pick you up." And I was like, "You're going to drive? This is the greatest day of my life, Parents, if you didn't know this, you can get a teenage guy to do about anything for pizza. So he pulls up, I get in his car, we're driving off to go get pizza, and we're just hanging out, we're talking. I'm not really paying attention to where we're going. I'm not really thinking about it. And I noticed we pull into a neighborhood. And I thought that was weird. I was like, wait, whatever, maybe there's Pizza Huts in this neighborhood. Maybe he's taking a shortcut or something, Pull into this neighborhood, and he pulls up to this house, and I recognize this house, and then it hit me. We're at Pastor Matthew's house. He pulls into the driveway, and I look right at him, and I go, dude, what are we doing here? I thought you were getting pizza. There's pizza every single Monday at small group, Bryant. I had been tricked into going to this small group. I was so angry. Like, I was so mad. In that moment, I was making some deductions. I was thinking to myself, cool, we're no longer friends. There better be pizza in there. This was before the time of Uber, so like, there's no way for me to get home. Like, I would have to walk home or I'm stuck. Like, I'm literally, like, I've been kidnapped. I have to go to this small group now. I'm mad. I'm frustrated. When we walk in the door, everybody's like, hi. Everybody's smiling. Hi, Brian. I'm like, hi. Where's the pizza? Like, I'm so mad. Pastor Matthew walked up to me and he was like, hey, man, I didn't know you were coming today. You liar. Yeah, you did. You put this dude up to it. Like, I was so angry, right? And so I got a slice of pizza. To his credit, there was pizza. I got a slice of pizza. I sat down in his living room. I thought to myself, I'm not going to say a word. Like, I'm going to show them they don't want me at this stupid small group. Like, I'm going to cross my arms. This was before, like, Twitter, so I couldn't just stare at my phone. Like, I'm going to cross my arms, and I'm just going to be mad the whole entire time. And I'll never forget what I experienced that first day at small group. See, I had all these preconceived notions of what a small group would look like. I had all these preconceived notions of what community looked like. And in that 45-minute session, I was completely proved wrong. I witnessed something that I had never seen anyplace else. I witnessed people be real. I witnessed students and leaders be authentic. I witnessed people as they prayed for each other, not just like, I pray for you, amen, but they were praying for each other like they were family. I witnessed people talk about the Bible in a way I had never experienced before. They didn't just read it and all agree and sing kumbaya. Like, they wrestled with it. Like, they disagreed with each other. And there were some, like, tense moments where I was like, oh my gosh, is a fight going to break out? Like I'd never seen anything like this before. Like, I'd never seen community like this before. And I didn't know it then, but I was watching students, I was watching people become disciples. I had been tricked into my first encounter with biblical community. And thank God I was. Because I went back to that small group every single Monday evening for my entire high school career, for years. I would go to Pastor Matthew's house, and we'd sit down, and we'd talk about the Bible, and we'd talk about life. And I remember it was in that small group that I made some really amazing friendships. And I'm not just talking about, like acquaintances. Like, I know you, I talk to you, we talk about sports. Like, I'm talking, like, people who I shared real stuff with. Like, I made friendships that a couple years later, when my parents got divorced, I was able to have real conversations with them about. I learned how to pray by watching people pray in that small group. Like, I think it's weird that we as Christians, we don't take, like, a class on how to pray, right? Like, you don't go to, like, Christian school and get a degree in prayer, right? No. Like, I watched people around me pray, and I learned how to pray. It was in that small group that I learned how to read the Bible. I discovered that reading the Bible wasn't like reading a textbook. It's not like reading an old ancient text. Like, it's alive, and you can wrestle with it and ask questions with it, and it can always take what you have to give it. It was in that small group I learned how to talk about my faith, and I learned how to talk about my doubts. It was in that small group I learned how to talk about my successes and my failures. I wouldn't have said this back then, but it was in that small group I moved from being just a believer in Jesus to being a disciple in Jesus. We're nearing the end of this series that we're calling 10. And if this is your first time here, or if it's your first time watching online, we at this church believe that there is an incredible difference between somebody who is a believer in Jesus and somebody who is a disciple in Jesus. And we believe that there are 10 qualities that set you apart. There are 10 qualities that move you from being a believer to being a disciple. Today we're talking about the 8th quality of a disciple, and it's simply this. A disciple engages in biblical community. A disciple engages in biblical community. If you want to be a real disciple, if you don't just want to be a believer, if you want to move from a believer, baby Christian, to a fully committed disciple, we have to engage in biblical community. Now, what is biblical community? Because that's a fun sentence, that's a cool thing to say, like that reads really well, but what does that actually look like? Now, I brought along a definition of what I believe biblical community is. Biblical community is 2 or more people who intentionally do life together and are committed to living out the way of Jesus. 2 or more people who intentionally, I think that word is really key, intentionally do life together and are committed to living out the way of Jesus. I think this definition is important because I think that there is no lack of community in our society. Like, if you think about it, there's no lack of community in our world. We have opportunities for community all over the place, right? Now, we have opportunities for community at our work. the person sitting right next to us, the person working the job with us. We know those people, and in a way we have community with those people. Sometimes we have lunch with those people. We throw birthday parties sometimes for those people. We work every single day with those people. That's community. Now, we have community at our schools. If you're in this room and if you're a student or a college-age student, we have people that we take classes with. And we have community in our neighborhoods. Sometimes we like to close the garage door and pretend like we're the only person who lives on our street, But we have community in our neighborhoods. If we walk outside of our house, there are other people around us. If you wanted to, right now you could pull out your cell phone and you could find community on the internet, right? You could go on Twitter, you could go on Facebook, you could go on Instagram. Not Vine, though, rest in peace, taken too soon. But you can have community on your cell phone right now. But I think that there's a difference between community and biblical community. I think a lot of us, we have friendships, but we don't have people who we intentionally do life with. We don't have people who we intentionally pursue the way of Jesus with. And I would say it like this. I would say that biblical community, it's not just a good idea. Biblical community is essential to discipleship. Biblical community is essential to discipleship. If you and I don't have biblical community, we will never be fully committed disciples. It's impossible. It doesn't work. It's not just a good idea. It is absolutely essential to discipleship. Because the truth is, you and I, we need people to do life with. We need it. We need people to share our triumphs with. We need people to sharpen us. We need people to encourage us. We need people to walk with us as we go through difficult times. We need people in our lives who have been following Jesus a little bit longer than us. We need people in our lives to help us live out the way of Jesus. This isn't just a good idea, it's a God idea. In fact, I would say that God cares a lot about community, and we know that by reading the Word. If you read the Bible, this idea of community is all over the Bible. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's start in Genesis. In Genesis, we read the story of creation. It's this beautiful creation narrative of how God created everything in existence. And one of my favorite things about this creation narrative is that it actually has a rhythm to it. It has a pattern to it. And so chances are you've probably read it, but in the very beginning, God creates light on the first day, right? He creates it with his words. He says, "Let there be light." And boom, all of a sudden there was light. I don't know what that must have been like, but it must have been amazing. Really, really cool. And then the Bible tells us he does something. The Bible tells us that God takes a step back. He looks at what he just created, and he says, "Yep, that's good." And this is the pattern through the creation narrative. We see it on the second and third day, God creates sky, water, and land. And after he does that, on both those days, he takes a step back, and he says, "Yeah, sky, water, and land, that's really, really good." And this is the pattern over the next 3 days. God creates fish and animals and platypuses and trees. He creates all these things in creation. And every time he's finished creating, every single day, at the end of the day, he takes a step back and he says, "Yeah, that's good." This is the pattern until God creates man. So the Bible tells us in Genesis that God gets on his hands and knees and he crafts Adam out of the dust. Side note, if you didn't know that God cares about you, God created the world with his voice, except for you. He got on his hands and knees and got his hands dirty to create you. God cares a lot about us. So he fashions Adam out of dirt. He breathes the breath of life into Adam. Adam is alive. He has created mankind. He takes a step back from his creation. He looks at it, and it says this in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18. "Then the Lord said, 'It is not good for man to be alone.'" Then the Lord said, "It is not good for man to be alone." The very first thing in all of creation that God looks at and says isn't good, it's not sin, it's not Eve's rebellion, it's not even spiders. All right, the very first thing that God looks at and says isn't good was the fact that Adam was alone. So we know the end of that story. We know that God creates Adam a friend, and he creates community. Let's fast forward a few hundred years later to the story of the Israelites. Let's fast forward to the book of Exodus. Exodus is one of my favorite books in the entire Bible because the reality is the story of Exodus is the story of all of us. We can all find identity in the story of Exodus. And so God uses Moses and Aaron. Notice how I said Moses and Aaron. Normally when one person does something in the Bible, it's always one person plus somebody else, community. God uses Moses and Aaron to rescue and to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Now, I don't know about you, but when I picture that in my head, sometimes I picture Moses and Aaron and like 20 dudes behind them running out of Egypt. But the Bible tells us that they actually led close to 2.4 million people out of Egypt. I just want you to picture that for a second. One day you're a shepherd in the desert. The next day you're over 2.4 million people. So 2.4 million people leave Egypt. They cross the Red Sea. God uses the Red Sea to destroy Egypt. And then God leads the children of Israel to Mount Sinai, where God and the children of Israel are going to make a deal. God's going to cut covenant with his people. He's going to look at this people and he's going to say, you are now my people. Here's the deal. And so I want to set the stage for you. Mount Sinai. Moses is standing on top of the mountain speaking with God. 2.4 million people are watching this happen, and God gives Moses the Ten Commandments. And I think there's something in the Ten Commandments that really speaks to this idea of community. The first 3 commandments are this. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, I think the interesting thing about these 3 commandments is that these first 3 commandments speak to how people are to relate to God, right? Like, here's how you guys are to relate to me. Have no idols, don't use my name in vain, have no other God before me. And then he gives the 4th commandment, which is remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. Side note, the Sabbath isn't just a good idea, it's really, really important for our spiritual lives. The Sabbath is how we keep our minds, our bodies, and our hearts spiritually healthy. So the 4th commandment is all about how God's people should take care of themselves. And then he gives the last 6 commandments. And I want you to pay attention as we read the last 6 commandments. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covenant. The last 6 commandments, 60% of God's covenant with his people, has to do with how God's people relate to each other. 60% of God's covenant, it's not about God, it's not even about people, it's about how people are neighbors to each other. God cares so much about community that most of the covenant he cuts with the Israelites is about how they're going to interact in community. Let's talk about this Jesus guy, right? Maybe you might have heard of him. He's pretty cool. Let's fast forward to the time of Jesus. The Son of God changes the world, makes himself 100% man, completely changes the world. How does he do it? With community. He does it with community. I mean, think about it. If the whole point was for Jesus to show up and teach a couple of cool messages and then go, wouldn't it have made more sense for Jesus to just appear places, speak messages, and then leave? You know, like if the whole point of Jesus' ministry was to show up, heal the sick, set the captives free, if that was the point and if that was how God was going to transform the world, wouldn't it have made more sense for Jesus to just beam down like Star Trek, heal the sick, and then beam back up? Wouldn't it make more sense for Jesus to just go straight up Batman on it, you know, like appear, defeat evil, leave? And everybody's like, wow, that was amazing. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus intentionally built community with 12 people. And he used that community to completely change the world. Even after Jesus, this idea of community persists. We read in the book of Hebrews this idea of what it looks like to be in biblical community. And let me set the stage for you. At the time that the book of Hebrews is written, the church, it's still very young, and it's under incredible persecution. The government was going into Christians' homes, pulling them out of their homes and executing them in the streets because they wanted to quell Christianity. They wanted to stop this heretical movement. And so if there was ever a time for the church to feel discouraged, if there was ever a time for Christians to feel outnumbered and with their backs against the wall, now was this time. And so the Hebrew writer writes to encourage these Christians on how they should act. And so let's read what he wrote in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. The Hebrew writer says this, "Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." How are the people of God going to get through this persecution? By not neglecting to meet together. If you think about it, this is nuts. Like, this is crazy if you think about it, because Christians are being killed. Like, they are intentionally being hunted by the government. And what does the Hebrew writer say? He doesn't say, hey, go into hiding. He doesn't say, hey, everybody run away, go your separate ways so they can't find all of us at once. No, he says, you know what? Continue to meet together. I think the Hebrew writer knew something that we need to know as well. He knew that if they were going to give up on biblical community, to give up on biblical community was to give up everything. Biblical community wasn't just important, it was essential. It was worth dying for. How are you going to get through this persecution? Keep meeting. Keep encouraging one another. Keep being in each other's lives. And if we do that, we'll get through this. We need biblical community, man. We need people around us in our lives to make us better and to pour into us. I remember when I was getting those text messages from Pastor Matthew and ignoring them, I remember one of the reasons I was ignoring them was because I just didn't know what it was going to be like. And I had all these preconceived notions for what this small group was going to be like. In fact, can I be honest? I pictured a group of people who were sitting around in a circle gossiping about everybody else. I pictured a group of people who you had to be perfect to belong to. And I discovered that could not have been further from the truth. Because in biblical community, we are authentic and we are loved anyway. In biblical community, we are authentic and we are loved anyway. I remember one day, this was maybe 2 or 3 months after I joined this small group, we were hanging out before a group started. It was about 10 of us. And we were talking about the Panthers game. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so I'm a Panthers fan. I know, Falcons fans, I know. Look, we can at least agree on one thing, all right? We may not be able to agree on the team that we like, but we can both agree that the Saints are terrible, right? All right, cool, we're good there. So we were talking about the Panthers game that happened the day previous, and we had gotten killed. Like, we had just totally looked awful. And one of my friends looked at me and went, Brian, what do you, remember, we're in small group, we're in Pastor Matthew's living room. He pointed at me and he went, Brian, what did you think about how the Panthers performed yesterday? And I looked right at him and I said, shoot, man, the Panthers are terrible. Except I didn't say shoot. I said a different word. And I'll let your imagination fill that in, and if kids in the room, you don't know what I'm talking about, ask your parents after service. It'll be a good conversation. I said a totally different room, and the room got real quiet. Like, the room got real awkward. Like, I was the most unsaved kid in that room. Every other kid in that room had been going to church since they were, like, a second old. Like, the pastor's daughter sitting in that room. Like, it was bad, guys. Like, everyone got real quiet. And I started thinking to myself, do I need to leave? Like, is this the part where I get kicked out? Should I grab, like, a box of pizza on my way out and run, you know? And my youth pastor at the time, he was a pro. He stirred the conversation away from it. It was totally fine. But after our small group was done, I walked up to my youth pastor, and I was broken up over it. Like, I felt really, really bad. And if I'm honest with you, I was scared. I was really scared. I was scared I was going to get kicked out, and I had just decided I liked this thing. You know what I mean? Like, I had just discovered that I needed this. Like, I was so afraid he was going to be like, Brian, you may never come again, you know? Run, flee, and never return, like that scene in The Lion King. And I looked at him and I started apologizing. I was like, Pastor Matthew, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I let that slip. Please, please. And he cut me off. He said, Brian, stop. Don't worry about it, man. The Panthers make me want to cuss sometimes too. And I'll never forget what he said next. He looked at me and he said, Brian, none of us are perfect. We're all just being authentic. You don't have to worry about being perfect. Just come in here and be yourself. And we're all going to get better together, but just come in here and be yourself. Tears down my face, because I'd never been in an environment like that. Every other environment I've ever been in, I had to put on this face. I had to be perfect. I had to pretend like I had my life put together. And here I was in this community of people who were totally okay with me as me. They didn't want me to stay like that, but they could accept who I was now. Tears down my face. That's what biblical community should look like. We should create environments where people are 100% okay being themselves. Doesn't it get exhausting wearing the mask? Doesn't it get exhausting pretending like we're perfect at work or pretending like we have all our stuff together in front of our kids? Isn't it exhausting looking at our neighbors and trying to be like, yeah, I can be just like them. No, we're good. We're one and the same. It's exhausting. We need places where we can take off the mask and just be who we are. And let God heal through that. Let God carry us through that. 1 Peter 4:8 says this, and I love this passage because it really speaks to this idea of community. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Now, the word earnestly in this passage is a word here that means with sincere, intense conviction. With sincere, intense conviction. This is how we should love each other in biblical community. Sincerely, intensely, with conviction. Love is not this flimsy, weak thing. It's a powerful thing that compels us to be better and compels us to belong. God takes love very, very seriously. And when we do that, when we take love for each other very seriously in biblical community, we cover over a multitude of sins. And we cover over other things like insecurity and fear. Now, I remember a couple months ago, I got an email from one of our small group leaders. Shout out to all of our small group leaders, by the way. You guys are amazing, and we could not do this church without you. We can clap for them, yeah, because they're really, really cool. If you don't know that yet, it's probably because you're not a part of a small group, and we'll talk about that later. I got an email from one of our small group leaders. She sent me this story. Long story short, they had just started their small group, and they had a man who was Korean, from Korea, like he immigrated from Korea, come to their small group. And he was super quiet, like really, really quiet, really, really introverted, barely said a word. When small group was done, her and her husband, they started to strike up a conversation with this young man. And they discovered, A, that he was from Korea, and B, that he didn't speak a whole lot of English very well. He could understand it, but he didn't speak it. They discovered that he was a Christian, but he'd actually stopped going to church. And the reason he said he stopped going to church was because he felt like he didn't belong because his English wasn't good enough. The small group leaders looked right at him and said, "You belong here. You belong here." And he kept going to that small group, and he's a part of this church now. Because you don't have to behave to belong. You belong long before you behave. That's what biblical community should look like. In our community, we should feel safe to be authentic and know that we'll be accepted. I remember through that whole entire process, I felt so loved that I worked on my language. I would love to tell you that was the only time I cussed as a kid, but I'd be lying. I was able to work on my language, and I was able to make that better. And I think that's important because in biblical community, we are made better. In biblical community, we are made better. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17 says this, and you've probably heard this before. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. I remember my first encounter with this was maybe 6-7 months after I started going to that small group. I had another person who was a part of that small group. He was a senior at the time, and I was a sophomore, I think. Pulled me aside, and he just looked at me, and he went, "Bryant, can I make you better?" And I thought to myself, that's the stupidest question. Like, why would you add that? Who are you? Who talks like that, you know? But sure, whatever. Yeah, I mean, of course you may, brother in the Lord. He looked right at me, and he said, "Bryant, you can be really sarcastic." And I was like, "Thanks, man. Thanks for saying that." See, that's just how my mom and I communicated. You know, that's how our family communicated. So when he said that at first, I was like, "Oh, sweet. He noticed that I'm really sharp and witty. That's cool, you know?" He was like, No, Bryant, like, sometimes you hurt people with your sarcasm." And I'll never forget what he said. I looked right at him and I went, "That's not true." And so he gave me an example. And then he gave me another example. And then he gave me a third example. One example is like a fluke. 2 is like a freak accident. 3, you're the problem. It's you. And I was so humbled in that moment. I was like, man, how come nobody has come to talk to me about this? And he looked right at me and he said, "Because people are afraid of you, Bryant. They're afraid if they come and talk to you about it, you'll just cut them down." And then he looked at me and he said this, "Bryant, can I help you?" Because that's biblical community. Community will just point out something in you. Biblical community will help you walk through it. "Bryant, can I help you?" And I was like, I mean, sure. So we worked out this really dumb system where whenever we were in a social circumstance and he felt like I was being too sarcastic, he felt like I was being a little extra, he would just look at me and he'd be like, "Bryant, are you feeling okay today?" And I always knew that was his way of saying, "Bryant, you're being a jerk. The person you're talking to is holding back tears, bro. Like, stop. Are you feeling okay today?" "Oh yeah, man, sorry, I'm just a little under the weather." And that was his cue to me to like adjust the way that I was talking. And he didn't just stop there. He started sending me Bible verses about the way that my language, the power that my language has. He was the first person to point out to me that God created the entire world with his words. He created us in the image of God. So if when God creates, when he speaks, he creates. What do we do when we speak? We create, right? He's the first person who pointed that out to me. And then he would pray for me. And I don't just mean like he would tell me he was praying for me. Like at the end of small group, he would literally like put hands on me and pray for me almost every single week. And at first I thought it was the weirdest thing in the world, but the longer I've known Jesus, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, that was amazing what that guy did for me. He walked me through that. And I'm so glad that he did because I didn't know that I had that flaw. It was a blind spot. Like I couldn't see it, and he pointed it out to me and he helped me walk through that. That's what biblical community does. That's what biblical community does. It makes us better. It calls us out. It lifts us up. You cannot be a disciple alone. There are things about yourself that bug people and you don't even know it. Your wife or your husband could probably tell you, but you don't even know it. Like, we all have blind spots. We all have flaws that we don't know about. Heck, we have flaws we know about, but we can't change by ourselves, right? I'll never say that again. I'll never do that again. I'll never go there again. And what do you do the next day? You say that again. You go there again. You do that again. Because ourselves, we are weak. I am weak. Without the people around me, I am nothing. Biblical community makes us better. Do you have people in your life making you better? Or do you have people in your life you just talk about football with? Do you have people in your life who have the permission to call you out? Or do you have coworkers you just eat lunch with and you ask about each other's kids and then you leave? A believer is totally fine with shallow community. A disciple knows the only way they're going to get better is if they have true, authentic biblical community. And this is important. Like, we all have to become together, or we all have to become better together. And this is important because in biblical community, we accomplish far more together than we ever could apart. In biblical community, we accomplish far more together than we ever could apart. I got a front row seat to this a few years ago when I went on a mission trip. If you've never been on a mission trip, you should go on a mission trip. There's something about getting out of your normal environment and seeing a different part of the world that completely opens our eyes to the way that God thinks globally. I don't know if you know this, but God isn't just the God of America. He's not just the God of Buford, Georgia. Like, he's the God of the entire globe, and he's working all over the globe, and it's important for us to see the way that God works all over the globe. So about 3 years ago, I went on my first mission trip to Nicaragua. And we actually support a school down there, and the school is really, really cool. They intentionally planted this school. It's called LifeLink International in the poorest part of Managua. Managua is the capital of Nicaragua. And if that school had not been there, if they had not planted that school there, the kids in this neighborhood would not get education. They would get no education, as is the average Nicaraguan only has a 6th grade education. So they planted this school, and this school is providing better education to these kids in this community than the public schools are offering in the rich parts of town. Like, they're killing it. Their dream is that one day a kid from this school would be the president of Nicaragua. Like, that's their big, huge vision goal. They're trying to equip these kids with skills and with education so they can change that country. And so we were going down a couple years ago, and I was really excited. I was like, I can't wait to minister. I'm going to minister to the teachers. I'm going to minister to the kids. Like, I can't wait. Like, I'm a pastor. I'm so excited to go down. Like, I'm going to see what God is doing in Nicaragua. I cannot wait to minister. And we pull into the school, and the school is kind of like a compound. And at the time, they were getting ready to build on a new building. They were getting ready to build a brand new cafeteria and a computer lab. Now, that sounds really normal here, but there are no schools in Nicaragua with a computer lab. Like, that's crazy. And so we pull in, and I noticed there were these giant piles of dirt all over the school. And I'm thinking to myself, they're probably using that dirt for construction. Those poor fools. You know, I can't wait to minister. And so we're talking with the missionaries, and they say, we've got some projects that we need you guys to work on. And we're like, cool. So they take us out, and they hand me a shovel, and they go, you see that pile of dirt? We need you to move all of that dirt into the frame of the building, because we're going to use that dirt to build the foundation of the building on. And I was like, oh, man, this is what I came down here to do. I flew to Central America to move dirt. This is great. Don't be dumb. Don't be dumb. I'm a leader. Don't be mad, you know. And so we would rotate in and out of the team at any given time. Probably 15 of us went down, so give or take 6 or 7 of us were working on this pile of dirt at a time. And what we would do is we would take these shovels with wooden handles, and we would, go into the pile of dirt. And in America, we have good dirt, okay? In most other places, they don't have good dirt, all right? If you hit in the wrong place, you would just hit a giant boulder in the dirt, and then your whole body would shake like you were a cartoon, We'd go into the dirt pile, we'd scoop up some dirt, we'd put it into a wheelbarrow, we'd fill that wheelbarrow, we'd pick up that wheelbarrow, which weighed 1 billion pounds. We would wheelbarrow it maybe like 30, 40 feet to this building. We'd hop it over the barrier, and we'd dump the dirt into the building, and then a team in the building would smooth out the dirt. Oh, and it was 100 degrees, and it was Central America. So I was in a real good mood doing that. We did this for a week straight. It was not like I had pictured what we were going to do. But I'll never forget, at the end of the trip, we had moved something like 8 or 9 giant piles of dirt, and the foundation was almost completely laid for this building. And I remember looking at it and being like, wow, that's really cool. But I didn't know how cool it was until I came back the next summer. The following summer, I brought a group of middle school students, which was fun, let me tell you. I brought a group of middle school students down there, and we pull into the school, and the cafeteria and the computer lab are completely done. In fact, there are kids eating lunch in the cafeteria. And I remember looking at that and being like, dude, I moved all that dirt. Like, that's my dirt they're standing on right now. And then I thought about it some more, and I was like, wait, no. We moved that dirt. That's our dirt they're standing on. And then I thought about some more, and I was like, wait, somebody had to paint these walls. And somebody had to make all the ties for the building so that way the building would be foundationally strong. And somebody had to move all of these supplies and build these walls. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, other trips came in here and did that too. And so it's not just me and my team. It wasn't just me and my community. It was another church in their community. It was a second team from here in their community. There were probably a dozen trips in there that went in there and helped build that building. And I took a look, and I stepped back, and there were like little tears growing in my eyes, and all the middle school kids are making fun of me. And I'm like, community built that. And one of us by ourselves couldn't have done that. Like if you had put me there and you had been like, Bryant, build a building, I would have been like, you fool. I can't even spell building. What are you talking about? Like, I don't go outside, you know? I could not have done that by myself. Not one of us could have done that by ourselves, but community together did it. When we are in biblical community, we accomplish for the kingdom far more than we ever could by ourselves. Far more than we ever could by ourselves. We see this idea play out in our small groups all the time. Last Christmas, we got word of some families in the church who were struggling financially. And they were going to have a really tough time putting on a good Christmas for their kids. And that wasn't cool with us. We didn't like that. And so we actually reached out to our small groups, and we were like, hey, guys, we have some families in the church who could use some help. Could you do something? And we had 12 small groups in this church pool together their resources and buy toys and literally buy Christmas for a dozen families in this community. Not to like show off and be like, hey, we're cool, we can do this, but as a way of saying, hey, Jesus loves you, and we as the body of Christ are going to take care of each other. And one person alone couldn't have done that, unless you were like Elon Musk or something, right? Like one of us alone couldn't have done that, but when we all got together and pooled our resources and pooled our efforts, and together in community, we were able to completely bless we changed a dozen families' lives, just like that. Because together we accomplish, we can clap for that, that's awesome. Because together we accomplish far more than we do by ourselves. I think this is why Jesus had the 12 disciples instead of just the disciple. Like, I don't know if you ever thought, like, what if Jesus had just hung out with one dude, you know? Because he knew that one dude probably could not have built the church. But a dozen of them might do. And a dozen of them creating a dozen communities within themselves, that might work. The church was built on community. If not for the 12 disciples, if not for that community, we wouldn't be sitting here. I probably wouldn't know Jesus. You might not have your life changed by Jesus. Community changes things, and when we engage in biblical community, we accomplish far more together than we ever could by ourselves. Maybe you alone can't get all your neighbors to Jesus, but maybe your small group can. Maybe you alone, maybe you have a passion for young people and you want to disciple every single young person in this community. That's awesome. You only have 24 hours a day and you have to have a job and you probably have a family and you need to eat and sleep, right? Like maybe you can't do that alone, but if you partner with the Capital, our high school ministry, if you partner with the city, our middle school ministry, you can join a biblical community that is changing students' lives in the Beaufort area. Maybe you have this dream of going to this country. Maybe you want to go to Central America or South America or Asia or Europe. How many of you guys know that just because it's in Europe doesn't mean they don't need Jesus too, right? Like maybe you want to go, maybe you have this idea of transforming a country for Jesus, but you don't know how to get started. You don't have the finances to do it. You don't even know what to do. Maybe you can't do it by yourself. Maybe you can join a missions team that can. In community, we do far more together than we could apart. One of my favorite quotes is by a lady named Margaret Mead, and she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." What could you plus a community do? Victory, let me ask you this. How are you doing with this? Are you connected to biblical community? Or are you missing out? Because that's what I would say. If you're not connected to biblical community, you are missing out. You are on the outside looking in. You could be doing amazing, great things. You could be becoming better. You could be finding a place where you can fully be yourself. And if you're not there, you're missing out. If you're missing out, I got some good news for you today. We have so many opportunities for you to engage in biblical community in this church. In fact, basically everything we do points in that direction if you'll engage with it. I wrote down just a couple of those examples that I want to share with you today. What about serving? Sometimes when we think about serving, we just think that like, oh, I'm going to come and I'm going to be a greeter and I'll stand by the door and then I'll go home and that'll be it. But that's not really what it is. Every single Sunday morning, I walk in just enough time to watch our 9 a.m. greeters and usher team praying in the cafe. And they pray for each other, and they know each other's names, and they know each other's kids, and they have real biblical community. I see this in the parking lot. I see this in our Vic Kids team. I see this in our city team downstairs when we have pre-service meetings and when we hang out and when we're family. Like, we are not just serving together, we're community together. If you're a guy in this house, if you're a man in this house, and if you do not have godly men friendships, if you do not have relationships where you can be authentic with other men, you need to get connected to our men's ministry. You need to get connected to our men's ministry. Our men's ministry meets every other Saturday morning here at Hamilton Mill. They eat free breakfast. I'm going to say that again, free food. Men, I'm going to say that one more time. Free food. They eat free food. They're authentic with each other, and they learn how to be men of Jesus together. Man, if you're a guy in this house and you're not connected to our men's ministry and you need godly friendships, what are you doing? Come get connected to it. If you're in this room and if you are a young adult, and we would consider a young adult anyone between the ages of 18 and 30, married, kids, single, college, career, whatever. If you're in that age range, we consider you a young adult. And you feel like you don't have any healthy friendships, you feel like you don't have any healthy relationships, if you feel like there's not somebody you feel like you can be authentic around, we would encourage you to get connected to our Fusion ministry. And what that looks like here at Hamilton Mill is it looks like once a month we have a gathering next door in our chapel. It's usually the second Tuesday of every single month. And then we have Fusion small groups that meet throughout the week, or throughout the month rather. And our Fusion small groups are amazing. Like, I hear so many cool things that happen through those small groups. If you're a young adult and you're not connected to Fusion, you're missing out on community. If you're in this room and if you're you're the age of 50 or better, we have a community for you called O50. And it's led by a couple of amazing leaders named Wayne and Nancy Stanford, and they kill it. And what they do is they create environments where people in that age range can be authentic with each other, grow together, and have a lot of fun. If you're in this room and you're over the age of 50, like, there's a community for you to get plugged into. Now, if you're in this room and if you're a high school student, we have Capital on Wednesday nights. You want to be there because you want to get connected to what community looks like. If you're in this room and you're a middle school student, what are you doing with your life? The city's meeting right now next door. You could be having so much fun in the city. Like, you're in here listening to me and you could be having fun next door in the city. What's wrong with you? Like, get connected to that ministry because you'll make friends and you'll hear about Jesus in a way that you'll actually care about. Maybe you're in this room and you're like, I feel called to missions, and I want to connect in community on a missions trip. I have some great news for you. We're sending out so many missions trips from this church this year, and there's still time for you to get connected to one. Go online on our website, victoryhamiltonmill.com/missions. You can find a missions trip for you. Get connected, go change some people's lives in a different country together with community. And then the last one, and you guys knew this was coming, I'm small group pastor, so I'm going to do it. We have small groups here at this church. And I would say it like this: we 100% believe that we are becoming a church not just with small groups, but a church of small groups. It is our desire, it's our vision here at this church to see each and every single person who calls this church their home connected to a small group. Not so we can say we have 8 billion small groups, but it's that way we know each and every single person is getting taken care of and growing as a disciple. I checked this morning before I came up here. We have over 60 different small groups currently represented just at Hamilton Mill, just in this location. Now, if you put all of our small groups together, victory-wide, we have close to 300 small groups. Just Hamilton, yeah, okay, we can clap for that. Small groups are great, yay. Here at Hamilton Mill, those 60 small groups meet anywhere in the Northeast Atlanta area. So chances are, unless you're in the room and you live in South Carolina, like, there's a small group that meets around you. Like, locally, you could probably find a small group that's close to you. We have men's small groups. We have women's small groups. We have young adult small groups. We have O50 small groups. This semester, we started 2 online small groups. And we created these for people who maybe your schedule is completely nuts. Maybe you work in Atlanta, but you have no issue dedicating some of your time opening up your computer, opening up Google Chat or whatever they use, and talking with people, being authentic with people over the internet. If you're in this room and if you have a pulse, we have a small group for you. If you're in this room and you don't have a pulse, that's bad. We should talk. But if you're in this room and you have a pulse, we have an opportunity for you to connect to community. In fact, at the end of service today, out here in our lobby by our Welcome Center, we're going to have small group leaders out there that you can meet today. And if you talk to one of those small group leaders and the small group doesn't really work for you, maybe the time is different or the day doesn't work for you, out at the Welcome Center we have iPads set up where you can go on our website right now and you can pull up a map. You can type in your address, you can pull up a map, and it'll show you every small group within a 10-mile radius of your house. It'll show you every small group within a 20-mile radius of your house. You can click small groups that have childcare, small groups that don't have childcare. We want to provide these resources so that way you can find the perfect small group for you. And this is what I would say, because I hear this all the time. Brian, I don't have time for a small group. Brian, I work late. Brian, I have kids, and my kids are playing football, basketball, tennis, croquet, curling. They're in the chess club, the drama club, the second drama club, the glee club. They play cello and bass, and I have to drive them around 24/7, basically. And let me just say this. Like, I'm not saying that any of that stuff is invalid. All that stuff's really important. But this is what I would say. If you're serious about being a disciple, you don't have time to not be in a small group. You don't. You don't. You don't have time to not be in a small group because every single day you're not connected to biblical community is another day you're not actually being discipled. And if you're serious about being a disciple, and if you're serious about wanting to change this world, and if you're serious about living this Jesus way, you need people in your life. It's not just a good idea, it's essential. It's an important ingredient. Without it, we cannot do it. What would your life look like if you got connected to biblical community? How would your life be different? What would it look like if you had a group of people who you could take the mask off with and be 100% real with? What would it look like if you had people in your life who could make you better, adjust you, let you know when you're looking dumb? What would it look like if you had people in your life who you guys together did amazing things that you couldn't do separately? And then, Victory, let me ask you this. What would it look like if all of us got connected to biblical community? How would that change the world around us? Can you picture thousands of disciples connected to biblical community, becoming healthy, becoming powerful, and then going out and changing this world? I'll tell you what would happen. We would flip this community upside down. We would change Buford. We would change Hamilton Mill. We would change DeCuleo. We would completely transform Northeast Atlanta. Not because of anything inside of us, but because of the way Jesus works through all of us. I want to live in a world, I don't know about you, but I want to live in a world where I have people around me I can be honest with. I want to live in a world where I have people around me who have my back, who could let me know when I'm doing wrong and could encourage me when I'm doing right. I want to live in a world where I have people who will pray for me. Not just say they'll pray for me, but will actually pray for me. I want to live in a world where me and my friends and my relationships and my community, where we matter, where we make a difference. I want to live in a world where our community is so attractive we change the world around us. That's where I'm going. Victory, who's coming with me? Who's coming with me? Let's pray. If you would do me a favor and bow your heads and close your eyes. This is what I know. I know that it is really hard to engage in biblical community if we don't first have a relationship with the one who invented it. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we didn't invent relationships. We didn't invent friendships. We didn't invent community. It's always been a God thing. God invented it. It was his plan for us to step into, but I know it's so hard for us to see that, and it would be so hard for us to engage in that if we don't first have a relationship with him. And so in a room this big with this many people, 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I know there are probably some people in this room who maybe this is your first time here. Maybe this is your first time in a church. Maybe this is your first time in a church for forever. If this is your first time here, I want you to know a couple of things. I want you to know that you're a part of the family. You don't have to do anything. You're already a part of the family. And I want you to know that God loves you. God's not waiting for you to be perfect. He's not waiting for you to do anything. He just wants a relationship with you. He wants a friendship with you. And through that relationship and through that friendship, he can completely turn your life upside down. He can set you free. So with every head bowed and with every eye closed this morning, if you're in the room and if you know you need to say yes to Jesus today, maybe you said yes to Jesus a long time ago, but maybe if you're honest, you've been living a life that really hasn't honored that. Or maybe this is the first time you've ever heard of this God who loves you and just wants a relationship with you. But if you're in this room and if you know you need to say yes to Jesus this morning, with every head bowed and with every eye closed, just throw a hand up in the air. Thank you. Thank you so much. There are hands up all over this room. You can put them down. This is what I want to do. I want to lead you in a prayer. And this prayer is not a finish line to your relationship with Jesus. This prayer is the starting point to your relationship with Jesus. And if you're in this room and if you would say, I already have a relationship with Jesus, if you would do me a favor and if you would repeat this prayer too, just so that way the people who raise their hands don't feel awkward. Chances are somebody once repeated a prayer with you. Victor, if you'll pray with me, if you'll say, Jesus, I believe you're real. I believe you died on a cross for my sins. I believe you rose from the dead and I believe that you have a plan for me. Jesus, starting today, I say yes to you. You are my friend, you are my Savior, and you are my King. Today and every day for the rest of my life. If you just said that prayer either for the first time or if you recommitted, today's the best day of your life because you're no longer by yourself. You're no longer alone. You're no longer isolated. You're no longer lost. You now have family. You are now a member of the family of God. And along with that, you can now have biblical community. And you want that because in biblical community, we can be authentic, we can be made better, and we can change this world. Let me pray for you as we close. God, we love you. And Lord, I thank you for each and every single person in the room this morning. God, I thank you for the fact that you have called us to community. Jesus, we acknowledge right now, Lord, that biblical community is essential to discipleship. So God, I pray that you would help each and every single person in this room get connected to biblical community, Lord, that we would say no to the excuses, God, that we would say no to the apathy, and that we would say yes to your plan for discipleship in our lives. God, I pray that you give us your grace and your favor, Lord, and that you protect us and provide for us, Jesus. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Thank you.